I always like to help clients understand you can do the what ifs and the shoulds all day long, but sometimes even if you're doing everything possible, it's not going to fix the situation. So a simple reframe we use a lot is instead of what if, it's even if. So even if I'm doing everything for my mom, like she still may not always appreciate it. She still may not get better, So helping them to understand it's not all their fault. It's not all on them all of the time.
Welcome to In Good Company.
Catherine Matthews is a provisionally licensed professional counselor at Touchstone Counseling, where she helps individuals, families, and organizations navigate mental and emotional challenges. She specializes in practical, solution-focused care, offering services ranging from counseling and addiction support to high-conflict co-parenting and court-related programs. Through her work, Catherine is dedicated to helping people create meaningful change, build healthier relationships, and reach their full potential. Catherine, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Catherine, we're so glad you're here. So tell us, in the aging world, you've got folks that are hitting different milestones in their life. What are some of the things you see when older adults are coming to see you?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we start to see is a new sense of purpose. And as they get older, it's like, okay, what do I do now? Maybe I've retired. My family has moved away and has their own lives. We start to see a lot of loneliness, isolation, and just really that lack of purpose.
What age range would you say that starts?
Oh, I think it really depends. I think we especially see it, again, when you start to retire. So I'd say generally that 65 range, but for everyone, it's a little bit different. I think there's that boost immediate post-retirement where it's like, oh, this is awesome. I don't have to go to work. And then about a year later, it's like, okay, what do I do now?
Okay, so there's stages of retirement that are good and not so good.
Yeah, and I think it hits everyone a little bit different. In the counseling world, we say a lot of it depends. So it really does depend on the person, depends how much they've prepared for retirement, really can depend, has their spouse retired yet, or are they sitting at home by themselves? We really see it just fluctuate depending on the person.
I know for myself, I've kind of dedicated my life to my career. I can't imagine a world without it. Mm-hmm. It's so much of my energy that it's 50-50, my family and then my career, and so much of who I am, my purpose, that sort of thing. I don't have a lot of hobbies. I have a few, but it would definitely not fill the void. How do you start the process of helping somebody find new purpose in life?
Absolutely. So ideal case scenario would be, we would start to see someone investing in that before retirement. So if we start working with someone and they're planning for retirement, it's like, okay, what are you going to do when you retire? Planning ahead, finding things to look forward to. If someone hasn't done that, then once they've retired, it's like, okay, what do you enjoy doing? Who do you enjoy being around? I think exercise is a really important thing too for mental health and for physical health as they get older. So what can that look like? I think we all have been to the mall and seen people walking there. I think that can be a great pastime for people, but it's finding a variety of different things to fill different needs. So we need social interaction. We need things to help with our physical health. We need things to help with our emotional needs. Volunteering, a sense of purpose, finding meaning. I think it really comes into play of what are all of the different areas of life that we can still find a sense of purpose in.
I love that. So if you were to write a prescription for someone to say, I think you need this much social interaction, and I have a feeling you're going to say it depends, but let's just go down the road. There's a range there of what you think is healthy social interaction for someone. How much would you say is healthy?
Yeah. I would want to at least see someone having social interactions daily. So I know it's not, always available for everyone to get out and about every day. Our physical health can limit people from getting out of the house, but I think having someone to talk to each day is so important. So I have, aging grandparents at this point, and we try to either call them daily, make sure someone checks in on them, gets eyes on them. I think, again, it depends on the age at that point of what they're able to do, but I think at least some sort of social interaction every day really can help prevent a lot of the loneliness and isolation.
Yeah, and we're finding, or at least we've come across in our research, there's a gentleman in New South Wales that is doing some research in the correlation between dementia and Alzheimer's and isolation, and figuring out how do we keep people mentally stimulated and emotionally connected to the people around them. And the big question in my mind is dosage. Like if you look at it like it's a pill or a treatment, what's ideal is something that we're trying to like circle around so that we can give our families advice. What's your personal feelings on that?
Yeah. I always feel like the more intentional conversations that we can have, it will prevent that isolation more. So obviously in my work with counseling, we get with our clients 45 to 50 minutes of uninterrupted conversations. And we don't get that a lot in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
I think everyone is so busy and rushed. And, even with, for example, my aging grandparents, if I see them, I'm like quick in and out, right? Because I have other things to get to. But in my profession, we really see the benefit in quality conversation, active listening, and I think that 45 to 50 minutes, even if it's once a week, once every other week, really can make a difference. And so it's that whole idea of quality over quantity too. There's not always an exact, 5 minutes a day is perfect, right?
Sure.
But being intentional and connecting on a deeper level as opposed to just a, hey, how are you today? I think really makes more of a difference.
Yeah. So if you're advising some families on how to make those interactions higher quality, what kind of advice would you give them so that it's not just a, how you doing, mom? And then, they just give a report of what they've done lately. And then that's kind of where it ends.
Right. Yeah. I think great starting points, open-ended conversations. So asking open-ended questions and really finding out what do they enjoy, finding something to connect with them over. So maybe, your aging parent loves to quilt and that's not your thing. Learn something about it so that you can connect with them.
Yeah.
Yes, how are you feeling? That's such a generic question. And they probably are going to tell you that anyways. If they're not feeling well, they're going to tell you. And so going a step further of even asking what's something good that's happened to you today, if they're in a negative headspace, just really trying to find something that can bring them joy that then you can invest in, learn about, and connect with them over.
I'm a physical therapist, and I started this when I worked in the schools early on in my career. So I got to work with kids, and so much of what I did was distraction, like we've got to walk, we've got to, stretch, we've got to do balance, and I've got to make this fun, entertaining. And I can't have them focus on that it kind of is uncomfortable me stretching them,
right.
And so I had to get creative in distraction. And so I carried that over as I moved to geriatrics. We're pushing them functional mobility. They're getting tired. They're, kind of pushing themselves a little bit more. Some are more motivated than others. And so oftentimes I was quizzing them on their life story pretty heavy. And they could recall amazing amounts of information and had amazing stories. And what's interesting is that actually my dad, before he passed away, had physical therapy, and I was there with him when the physical therapist was talking to him, and I found out more about his life story than he told me, because he just seemed to open up to that, not total stranger, but you know what I mean? Like, right. It just seemed like that interaction was much on a deeper level. And so there was this part of me that thought, gosh, maybe it's more than just social interaction with families, even though I think that's critical. There's another piece to that puzzle.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that it's having someone that is a third party where they don't feel like they're putting the burden on a family member, because I think it can feel awkward to open up to family if you're struggling with anything, especially though mental health or things like that. And so opening up to a family member feels awkward, especially if that's not your normal types of conversations that you have. But, having a physical therapist or having a counselor or someone else just to come in and check in on you, you might see a lot of the deeper conversations.
Yeah. Quality, not just quantity, quality.
Right.
What about peers, interaction with similar peers? Do you have any advice around that?
Yeah, I think that gets hard. I think it is so important to have, but as people are aging, it gets so much harder because people pass away and, people stay in their homes. And so I think that can be something that's a huge benefit if an individual lives in a community where they can interact with other people their age, because they get it, right? There's that connection in, okay, we're going through similar stages of life and, we can talk about our grandkids or our kids together. And that's, again, a different type of need that a child can't fill, a physical therapist can't always fill.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we talk about different needs buckets. So having friends, having family, having hobbies, all of those fill a different type of need. And so it's still important to try to make time for.
Yeah. And so you mentioned early on a sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. What kind of buckets would you say when you're advising someone, you're trying to figure out what their interests are? How do you, I don't know what the right term is, kind of spin that in this is your purpose, so they have that sense of purpose, because some of them might not recognize it. Right.
Yeah. So I really like to get to know the client first and kind of identify what are their strengths and what are they doing really well already. What are those things that are going well for them in their life? And then look at, okay, what are those unmet needs? What are they lacking? And a lot of times it can take a little bit to figure out what they really are missing. But I always like to start with the strengths-based perspective of what can we grow in that we're already doing well. So maybe someone has really supportive family. We're going to appreciate that and try to build on that of, okay, if you have a good support system, how can you lean on them more? How can you, connect with them on a deeper level and maybe communicate to them what you need? If you're missing one of those needs, let's say the peer connection, where can we find that? And then I'll really help come alongside them to, maybe challenge them to find one place where they can go out and meet their peers, or, help talk about what are some communication skills, because even adults struggle to make friends, right? So how do we do small talk? Maybe we role play that in a session. But it's really just working at an individualized basis of, what do they feel like they need? And then maybe there's something that I'm seeing that I could help bring to their attention of, maybe you are missing a little bit of exercise or peer interaction, just to help you feel, kind of 1% better.
That's great. So let me shift gears to the adult child.
Yeah.
So mom or dad are getting older, and that adult child is starting to feel this sense of responsibility. And things are changing, sometimes rapidly, or it's all of a sudden, like the next day, they're in a situation where they're having to take control of situations. What are some of the things that you've seen, and what kind of advice do you give?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that I see is that adult child neglects themselves. So they jump straight into caregiver role and they forget to take care of themselves. And that takes a toll. I think if you all of a sudden jump into giving up all of your interests and needs and you're caring for someone else, there can be a lot of resentment, a lot of anger and frustration, a lot of guilt. Of course, there's sadness and, all of the just fears of what's to come. But I think what I see most often is, in my practice, is the caregiver who's been doing this for a year or two and all of a sudden is finally realizing I need support. I can't do this anymore on my own. Sometimes I don't even see them till after the loss, because that's finally when they are able to set aside some time for themselves.
So those out there who may be getting ready to go down this road, they're not there yet. They're a little bit concerned about mom or dad. What advice would you give them so that maybe they're not coming to you as bad?
Yeah. I think, starting to have those conversations with your parents, although they're awkward at times, of what will that look like? What do they want in the process? And then being open and honest about kind of what you feel like you can offer as the adult child. I think that's where organizations like you all can really play a supportive role of helping reduce that burden on the adult child. And so having those conversations early of, do you want to stay at home? If you do want to stay at home, what's going to make that possible? Are you willing to, maybe go to an assisted living facility if that's what needs would be like? Having those conversations before it's absolutely necessary, I think can reduce a lot of just the fear and anxiety in that adult child of having to make those decisions on their own down the road. I think too, you have to kind of learn as the adult child, what boundaries am I going to need to set into place? So boundaries are not to, push them to the side or to say, I don't care, but it's really to allow you to be that caregiver for as long as they're going to need it. So it can be a long, long process as, a parent can age. And so making sure I am still taking care of myself, I am still prioritizing my own family or my career, or whatever else is going on in my life, so that I can care for them as long as they need.
Yeah. One thing that's come up occasionally in my career is I've had families that were kind of thrown into a situation, and maybe the history between that parent and child was pretty rocky. What kind of things have you seen and helped with?
Yeah, I think we see that too. It can complicate the process a lot whenever there is tension already. Within my practice, I've had a few of those clients in that situation, and it's really, I try to encourage them not to let guilt be the driver, but also to think about when they do pass away, will you regret not caring for them? Will you regret not being there? Or will you regret overextending yourself and being there? I think it's a hard, honest conversation of having to think about the future of what will I regret and what will I leave here being like, okay, I did what was within my control. I think the biggest thing I say over and over in all of my sessions is, what can you control and what's out of your control?
Right.
So no, we can't control our parents' behavior. If they're going to, be difficult in that relationship, I can't control how they respond, but I, at the end of the day, want to sleep well at night knowing that I have treated them with kindness and compassion throughout this process without losing myself either.
Sure. And we have had situations where the abuse continues, whether that's verbal or even physical, in some cases where they're, trying to care for that individual, and it's a rough road. What advice do you give in those situations? Yeah,
I think boundaries, again, are going to be really important because we don't want to be, treated that way. Now, in a situation where we know that that's not who that person was, I think we can oftentimes make the excuse there, and sometimes it's needed. But that's where we really have to practice self-care and take turns playing that caregiver role. So it would be great if, let's say a parent was being just verbally abusive to their adult children. It helps having siblings where you can kind of share that burden and rotate in and out, or at least process some of those emotions together. But if you don't have that and you're the sole caregiver, that's where we've got to bring in other supports or find someone who can allow us to take a break from it, because we can't endure that all the time, right? Yeah. We have to find a way to care for ourselves, to process what we're going through, and also to remind ourselves that, okay, the person that I know in that situation wouldn't say this if they were of their right mind.
Right. Yeah, I can only imagine how difficult it is to be in a situation. We've seen folks that, they moved in with their adult children, and and things aren't going well, and they're really struggling. They have a lot of guilt around it. You know, mom or dad is adamant that they're never going to go to any higher level of care. Maybe they can't afford a higher level of care, and you know, they're kind of stuck, and they're hoping, you know, somebody's going to come in and you know, get in the middle of that situation. And I just really feel for those individuals, because that's a really tough place to be.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. And I think that's where in my practice, you know, I can't always fix those situations. I can't wave a magic wand and, you know, help them in that situation. But what I can do is be there for them emotionally, and to care for them, and to help them realize they're not alone in this situation, and that it is hard. You know, we have to validate those emotions. And I think a lot of adult children or caregivers are afraid to talk about it, because if they complain about caring for a parent, means they don't love them. Or, you know, it's like, well, my parent cared for me, so it's my turn to do it back. It's like, yes, but it's still allowed to be hard, and you can still struggle and have the emotions behind it. And that's where really leaning on those supports where you can talk about the hard things is really important.
Yeah, it seems like as a culture, you know, we throw a lot of resources for parents who have to care for their child, and whether that's, you know, just trying to figure out how, you know, you're going to get, you know, a book, or, you know, I'm sure there's lots of groups out there that can help with that sort of thing. And it seems like culture wise, there's a lot of support, but on the caregiving side of it, it seems like there's almost shame around that. It's like, no, it should be, you know, perfect. And I'm here to take care of them, because that's what my obligation is. And if it's not going well, that it's almost like, I don't want anybody to know.
Right. Yeah, because I don't want to be a failure, or, you know, I don't want to let my parents down. I don't want to be negative, all of those things. But you're so right of it's not talked about enough. You know, I think anything kind of related to grief, death, loss, our society doesn't talk about enough. And I think that's where we see a lot of the isolation, a lot of the guilt, sadness, and people just struggling alone.
Yeah. You mentioned grief. I'm sure, what's your definition of grief?
Oh, that's tough. So I really view grief as any form of loss. So not just death, but it can be the loss of a relationship, a loss of identity, a loss of stability. Just any form of loss is what I consider grief in my work.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of different situations where we weren't sure what that patient or that family was going through at that time. You know, it's like these I don't think milestone's the right term for it, but these shifts in their lives. And you know, what are some of the things that you're seeing where you identify that as like, oh, this person's grieving, but it's not necessarily that someone passed away.
Yeah, I think we can see it in so many different areas. And so I have a lot of training in grief and loss specifically. That's my specialty area. And so I always am viewing clients from a lens of what kind of grief have they gone through throughout their life. I think pretty much everyone has gone through some form of friendship loss, breakup, you know, those types of things. And so those are the easy ones to spot, but it's really the deeper ones that, especially when we're talking aging, start to come to light. So starts with retirement can be a form of grief of I've lost this career that I worked my whole life for. All of a sudden, now it's gone. When we start to lose some physical, you know, abilities, I think that can be another form of grief of like, okay, I can't do the things that I used to do. Anything in the form of where we see that sadness, anger, shock, or denial. All of those, I think, kind of, to me, signal maybe there's some sort of grief going on here. So
I'm trying to connect some dots here and try to figure out, you know, what is the path to isolation? Because there's a road to get there, I'm sure. And maybe it is just work, but maybe there are other things that people need to look out for as a family member that you're like, oh, we need to double down right now because this is help me with the word milestone. I don't know what the word is, but this change that's happened in their life that is significant enough that we got to look out for this. And these are the signs of problems.
Yeah. A few warning signs that come to mind for isolation for me too. I think driving. If we stop driving, then we're not going out and about as much. So I have seen that with a lot of either elderly clients or, family members. Whenever they start to fear getting out and about, that to me is like, okay, are we going to have to set something up in place to help them continue to go to things that they enjoy? I think different social gatherings, I think for a lot of people having community can be really important. So if we start getting scared of being sick in crowds, that can lead to a lot of isolation. So even things like going to church, if all of a sudden an aging adult stops going, okay, now they're missing out on that set time where people engage with them and interact with them, and they're finding fulfillment in that. Trying to think of other warning signs for isolation too. Man, I think hobbies as well. If we stop engaging in those, we stay at home, and I think hobbies shift, right? So a lot of times it can be going out and about with people, but then if our hobbies become things just at home, we're not interacting with people on a daily basis. It's great to have those hobbies at home where we can craft or do things like that, but we need to find people that then we can talk about those hobbies with and connect to avoid that isolation too.
Do you see a change in anxiety levels as people get older?
I think it depends. I think that anxiety shifts. We see a lot more anxiety maybe related to health as we get older specifically. I think as we get older too, we can start to have a fear about our own mortality or leaving our family members behind. Will they be okay? Can see a lot of the anxiety show up of, okay, I'm putting all of this on my family. So I think anxiety can really shift and look different at that stage.
Yeah. I can only imagine, because, you're putting yourself in your loved one's shoes in it, like as an older adult. And as I get older and I think about my kids having to deal with me, and when I'm older, and I do feel a sense of like, oh, I don't want them to have to deal with me when I'm older at all. And I'm often curious, and this is just like a total curveball question, but do you think that we might see differences by generation, the new generations that are coming up as they're, as my kids, my youngest are 15, by the time I'm, maybe in my 70s or 80s or whatever whatever the stage is that might end up being a problem for them. I'm not sure when I'm going to be a burden to them, but right. But like, do you see that there might be differences in generations?
Yeah, I would think so. So on a personal note, my family has walked through, my grandma has been on and off of hospice for a year and a half, and it's shifted a lot of conversations within my family of exactly what you're talking about of, okay, we've learned from this and we're going to try to do this differently. I know my parents have talked about, okay, we're going to try to save as much as possible for the ability where we could be in a home long-term if need be, and setting up a lot of those like medical directives and things like that, really lining everything up. So I think we are getting smarter maybe over time of having those conversations sooner, being more prepared. We're not going to do it perfectly. It's going to be probably different issues at that time. But I do think once you are the caregiver, you really realize, okay, I don't want this to go maybe exactly this way for my children.
Right.
So you learn as you go, right?
Yeah. Well, and, as you get into this stage and you have your own kids, they talk about the squeeze, the adult children, they have older adults are trying to take care of them, but then they have kids too, that they're trying to stay focused on. And man, the pressure, oh my goodness, it just feels overwhelming.
Yeah. A lot of guilt with that too, because it feels like you're never doing enough for everyone, because you're trying to, be a parent, you're trying to be a good child, you're trying to then probably be a spouse, have a job. I mean, there's no way to do it all. And that's why I really encourage a lot of my clients of, first off, tell yourself you're doing the best that you can for that day, right? And it's also acknowledging no one expects perfection. give your best effort, show up. But at the end of the day, if you're showing that you love and care about someone, that is enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Learning to do a little self-care. That's key.
Yeah.
You work with such a wide range of clients. Are there commonalities you see, challenges they all face across different age groups?
Oh, I do think we see some similar types of challenges. I work all the way from little kids to older adults. And so I think our challenges are going to look different, but a lot of it does come down to just challenges with emotions. Not feeling enough can be a really big commonality. I think I do see a lot of anxiety, a lot of symptoms of depression, and a lot of relationship challenges. So I think with those relationship challenges that I see a lot of people struggling with their parents, with their siblings, with their friends, and really trying to just take on too much at one time. Within our society right now, I think we all have that hustle culture where we're trying to take care of everything and everyone all at the same time. And then we're burnt out and we're overwhelmed.
Are there some red flags with that to look out for, and when you should pursue counseling to deal with those matters?
Yeah, I think you can pursue counseling at any time. I always tell people you don't have to be broken to come to counseling. So nothing has to be wrong with you, but it's never too early or too late to seek support from someone. I think some of those warning signs that really we start to see is when it's starting to affect kind of our day-to-day life. So if you're not able to focus at work, or you're not able to turn off work and be present at home, if you're not sleeping, your appetite's off, those are really obvious changes that we can look out for. But I think we all kind of start to feel when we're a little bit off and we're starting to get a little of that anxiety creep up. And I would just encourage people to listen to that. Don't neglect it. Swallowing the emotions, they don't go away. They show up later in often uncontrolled ways. And so kind of the sooner that we can address those, really, I think the more relief people are going to feel.
And so for some listeners who may be a little nervous about the idea of therapy and counseling, what are some misconceptions that you could clear up to make them feel more comfortable with making that call?
Yeah, so many. So first and foremost, I think every counselor approaches things differently. So when I work with individuals, I always tell them, I may not be the best counselor for you, but I want to help you get there. So I'd encourage people to do your research, to look around, try to find what are you looking for and find a specialist in that area. So at Touchstone here in Ozark, we really pride ourselves on each of us is a specialist in an area so that we can meet their needs the best way possible. Some other misconceptions, I think back in the day, counseling was a lot of, okay, you lay on a couch, right? And how do you feel? We don't do that. We really try to help you address kind of those unhelpful thought patterns. We try to find solutions to things. Yes, we're going to talk about your emotions and feelings, but it's not just reflection all of the time. It's really, I think, at least how I approach it is problem solving and just being that support. As I talked about earlier, we too often don't give people the time of day. And I think in counseling, that's one of the very rare places where phones aren't a distraction. No one else is going to come and interrupt us. And there's a lot of power in that alone. And so with approaching counseling, don't think your issues are too small or too big for a counselor.
Access. So, people might have a hard time getting to counseling. They may not have the funds to get counseling, that sort of thing. Can you talk about access to care?
Of course. Yeah. So I think one of the great things that came out of COVID was really telehealth expanding significantly. So I know Touchstone at that time really hadn't done a lot of telehealth, but we now all of our providers can offer that. So as long as you're in the state of Missouri, Missouri counselors can do telehealth with clients. So that's one way to help with access. We also, their insurance will cover some counseling. If you don't have insurance, though, there are a lot of providers who offer sliding scale We at Touchstone have internship students who are in their master's program. They're supervised by a licensed professional counselor, and they offer sessions for as low as $25 a session. So we really try to meet the needs of our community members who can't always afford it, and also always will give other resources available as well.
Is it always one-on-one, or do you do groups?
We can do a whole variety of things. So we do individual counseling, we do couples and family counseling, and then we actually have a new education center right on the Ozark Square. And so we will do groups, workshops, classes, and those are a lot more affordable and accessible, and again, help with that isolation like we've talked about.
Have you heard of any groups doing connecting with any of the senior care facilities and trying to get connection there to that demographic?
I haven't heard of that.
Okay, just curious.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential of expanding, just more resources and support in this area specifically.
Yeah.
I think when we're talking elder care, grief, there's just not a lot out there yet. And so that's something that I would love to see grow.
Yeah, I love that.
What inspired you to get into counseling, and what problems do you set to solve?
Ooh, okay.
It's a twofold.
Yeah. What really inspired me to get into specifically grief counseling, I'll go with that. When I was in high school, I had several of my closest friends lose their parents to cancer. And then my boyfriend at the time, now husband, lost his dad to cancer about a year after we started dating. And so I think for me at that age, I felt really unprepared of how to support them. So it was a lot of the confusing feelings of, okay, I know they're going through a lot, but I don't know how to talk about it. I don't know what to do to help them. And so back then I thought I wanted to be a doctor and, went to school, started in biochemistry, clearly realized this is not what I wanted to do. So then COVID happened at the time, and I was volunteering on the National Suicide Prevention chat line and realized how much our young kiddos were struggling. So I think bringing those two pieces together, at that time I was like, okay, I always wanted to help people. I've never known quite how to with the tools in place. And so from that point, I was like, okay, I'm going to go into mental health. And that's really, my passion's grown from there. I think problems that I have wanted to solve, I don't know that there's any specific agenda that I have. Really, I just feel like there is such a need for connection and for listening. And so I think for me, to be that safe, trusted adult in someone's life is invaluable. And such an honor for me of being able just to be there with people in some of their lowest moments, but also to help them celebrate their wins. I think some people don't have anyone in their life, or maybe they have one person that kind of cares in their life, but I can be that consistency and that presence that is there for them in the good and the bad. And that to me is just fulfilling in a way that nothing else is.
Could you share a success story with us?
Oh.
Without any names, of course.
Right. There is a family that I've worked with for quite a while now, and they have been going through the grieving process. And it's been, there's some legalities involved, and because they had a family member who was actually murdered. And so that has been a really complicated and a really heavy process for them. But seeing, after about a year of counseling, seeing how their marriage has improved, seeing how them as individuals can experience joy again, just through being able to talk about their loss, have that loss, turn into kind of the stage of grief where it's meaning making, has just been the sweetest journey, because now they're able to, they phrase it in a way that we're able to celebrate her life and not just think about her death now. And that to me was just a moment that felt like a success.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
As we were talking, I was thinking, teenagers, the psychological changes that happen, and everybody attributes it to hormonal changes, right? And there's a midlife crisis and maybe there's a similar change that's going on. How much does biology play into the mental health side?
Yeah, I think biology does play a big role. I think we see brain shifts happening. That's a big one that happens in adolescence. So I think biology does play a huge role, but I also think the environment that they're in maybe sometimes can play a bigger role too.
Okay.
That's, I think, where, I can't really help a lot with the biology side of things as a counselor, but I focus a lot on their environment without forgetting some of those like hormone shifts or brain shifts that are happening as they start to develop too.
What if you have somebody that you're treating and you suspect that maybe there's some dementia?
That's where we would refer out. So if I suspect that that's kind of happening, anything medical related, as counselors, we will encourage them of talk to your primary care physician, talk to whatever kind of supports that they have in place. In that scenario too, I think bringing some awareness to it without them feeling judged. So if they're forgetting things consistently, kind of honing in on that and asking, have you noticed this? Is this something that seems to be bothering you? Because I don't want to jump to, okay, well, I think you have dementia. And they're going to be like, well, shut up, right? And be like, I don't want to be here anymore. And so I think it's really just coming from it with a compassionate lens, but also helping them grow in that self-awareness and recognize if they do need additional supports.
That's great. Okay, now I'm going to shift to a little bit darker topic, elder abuse. Do you run into that? And I know you're a mandatory reporter, but what are some of the signs and symptoms of elder abuse of any kind, and what should people look out for?
Yeah. So I have not seen that a lot in my practice. I think, it can happen anywhere, any place. I do think, unfortunately, we see that a lot in maybe more of those facilities where they're not having eyes on them at all times with family members and stuff. Yes, it can happen between family members, though, too. And so I think, yes, I am a mandated reporter. So if I hear about that, I have to report it. But what I always like people to know, too, is anyone can report those instances. So you don't have to be a doctor, nurse, counselor to report those things if you're suspecting that something's happening. Always better to report and let them do the investigating than you try to do the investigating on your own. Some signs, though, to look out for, of course, the physical things. So if we're seeing bruising, if we're seeing any weird kind of physical signs, I think always pay attention to those. I think nutrition can be a big one too. Making sure, it's hard to know if they're taking all of their medicine or if they're eating all of their food, but if you're having concerns about it, don't be afraid to ask. Try to make notes of it yourself. But again, you can always report and let them do the investigating if you're really concerned about it.
Yeah, one of the things we've brought up on this show before is, I think, again, people sometimes get thrown into these caregiving roles. They're not taking care of themselves. They're burning it basically on both ends. And because of that, their mental state changes over time. Their patience changes and that sort of thing. And so the big thing that it's like, let's not shame people about this, but just making sure that we're identifying and educating people so that they can know when they're moving into this realm of, I can't function as the caregiver anymore. It's time for me to throw in the towel. And that will help me that'll help me at least maintain a relationship with this person. It doesn't, because we've seen it to a point where there's definitely some form of elder abuse going on because that situation just went on way too long and that person's mental state is just shot.
Right. Yeah. I think when the exhaustion really kicks in, when that anger and resentment kicks in, I think, like you said, we're not acting in our right mind at that point. And that's where it's so important to have that self-awareness in yourself to recognize when it's too much, but also to have people who can hold you accountable. So I think we oftentimes can see, for example, let's say I was caring for my mom. I'm going to pour my heart and soul into that, right? And that's where maybe I would need my husband to be like, hey, when's the last time you've eaten a meal? When's the last time you've showered? When's the last time you've stepped out of this house and cared for yourself for a minute, right? So I'd really encourage people, of course, do those check-ins for yourself, but also identify someone who can hold you accountable to where it doesn't get to that point where you're not acting in your right mind, where you're going to carry a lot of, guilt and shame about that for the rest of your life too. And don't be afraid to ask for help, whether that's from another family member, a friend, a professional. It's okay to ask for help and to bring someone else in to help you care for your parent in the best way possible.
I love that. It's a great sentiment. I think so many times there's so much guilt that I should, be this, superhero in the middle of this, or and maybe they just don't have the support system in place in order to make that work and still have a life and be able to function and eat, sleep. That's one of the bigger issues that we've run into is as people who are caring for a loved one with dementia. That is a very, very difficult situation that can change rapidly, and that can turn into a 24-hour care situation relatively quickly. And they think, Absolutely. Oh, well, they're here, I'm here, and you think you're going to sleep, but that's just not how it works. Eventually, you're not sleeping at all because any bump in the night, anything that happens, you're wondering, is somebody up? Is somebody doing something? Are they walking outside, that sort of thing.
Right.
And these things happen a lot. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people, it's not their fault. We just don't have good education around how do you set up a house properly? How do you sleep when you've got, a loved one that you're really growing concerned that they're going to wander or worse, they're going to catch the house on fire, right, and that sort of thing. And when do we throw in the towel? It's like there's nobody that will actually give them the answer to that because they'll all say, it depends, right? But it's so true that how many people are out there right now, and some of them are listening to the show right now that are really thinking, oh boy, this is maybe, I'm overwhelmed right now and I don't even know where to go or what to do to take first steps.
Yeah. And I want to go back a little bit where you were talking about all the shoulds. So talking about, okay, well, I should do this, I should do that. I always like to help clients understand you can do the what ifs and the shoulds all day long, but sometimes even if you're doing everything possible, it's not going to fix the situation. So a simple reframe we use a lot is instead of what if, it's even if. So even if I'm doing everything for my mom, like she still may not always appreciate it. She still may not get better, So helping them to understand it's not all their fault. It's not all on them all of the time. I think to that listener who is struggling and going, how much longer do I do this? How do I find supports? Just reach out to someone. And hopefully they are strong enough to help connect you to the right person. So that could be to you all, right? Could be to bring someone into the home to help with the caregiving role. It could be to a counselor to help you figure out what are the right boundaries? How do I deal with the emotions that I'm experiencing? Maybe it's to a doctor, to help with a prescription if you are experiencing so much anxiety or if you need something to help you sleep, Finding the right supports and connections along the way just starts with one person.
Well said.
How do you help people make that first step?
I think, I can't call on people, to bring them in, but I think just really encouraging them that they're not alone, encouraging them that everyone struggles at some point in their lives, right? So I think oftentimes mental health is still very stigmatized and people don't talk about needing supports. But it's always amazing to me even the strongest people or the people who look the most put together come into my office, right? And so I think there's nothing wrong with admitting, okay, I need a support system, right? If you are that caregiver at home and the only person that you have to talk to is your parent with dementia, that's really lonely and isolating. And so it's okay to need someone else to talk to. And that can start with a phone call, an email, even a message online to a counselor. I think just reaching out and knowing that someone is there to be there for you.
And how can listeners reach you at Touchstone?
Yeah, so we have a website, touchstonehelping.com. And on there, you can find our phone number, you can find our email. We have, I think about maybe 15 providers now between full-time and internship students. And so everyone, kind of has a different specialty area. So you can kind of read and learn what's my best fit here. So that's how to reach us at Touchstone specifically.
If you were to talk to someone out there who may be really struggling right now with mental health, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I think definitely it's okay that you're not okay. I think that's the biggest thing to start with. And just know that there are people who care. Even if it feels like you are all alone, there is someone out there who will hear your story and will help meet you where you're at. So just reminding yourself that it's okay to admit that you're hurting, that you're experiencing difficulty, and knowing that there is hope in the process too. It will get better.
Well said.
Yeah. Catherine, thanks for the work you do.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
If you enjoyed today's conversation, make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.
And we'd love to stay connected. Follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and on Instagram at In Good Company Elder Care Podcast.
You can also find us on X, formerly known as Twitter, at IGC Pod, and on TikTok at IGC Elder Care Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to In Good Company. I'm John Ray, and I've been joined by my amazing co-host, Spencer Ernst. Special thanks to our executive producer, Alex Wallace, for helping bring this show to life. Until next time, take care, and remember, you are always in good company.